Hey guys, welcome back to another great game of CDH. Today's episode is going to be a little shorter, as when I'm recording this, I'm prepping for MagicCon Vegas. Although I guess by the time you see this, the convention will almost be over. And while I'll certainly be tired at this point, I'm certain the weekend would have been a blast. Hey you, looking for a way to support the channel? Check out the Patreon. Want some cool mtga apparel? Check out the online shop. Or just looking to play some Magic? Hit us up on our Discord.
Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board.
Starting us off is Hidden, bringing Kroxa and Kunoros. This is a Mardu Reanimator combo list, aiming to assemble Altar of Dementia and his commander to sack and reanimate Kroxa over and over, winning with just 2 cards. Next up is Fernando on Najeela, and what can I say, warriors, warriors, warriors. Or more accurately, Thassa's Demonic. But love it or hate it, this is one of the best decks in the format, and it's here to stay. In the third spot is Claw King, piloting Kess. All about that Grixis Storm, Kess loves casting spells, and with both Thassa's and Underworld Breach, this is a spicy list to run. And bringing up the rear, we have Veil of Death on Atraxa. This deck seems to be the new boogeyman of the format, giving the best cards Sans Red can offer, while having a massive source of card advantage in the command zone. But without further ado, let's get on to the gameplay. And before the game starts, Death mulls to 6. Hidden starts off the game with a Spectator Seating and a Mana Crypt, tapping the Crypt for Mana Vault. Although Fernando is quick to respond with a Mental Misstep. And while that stinks, Hidden still has more as he casts a Ragavan. Fernando plays a Bloodstained Mire, cracking it to grab a Vault, but shortcuts as he casts a Ragavan of his own. Claw King has a tapped Steam Vents, passing after that. Death plays a Verdant Catacombs and casts a Lotus Petal. He then cracks his fetch for a Trop Island, using the card for a Carpet of Flowers. He passes through combat and on his second main activates the carpet for a green or an Elves of Deep Shadows. Hidden takes 3 from his script and plays a Gemstone Caverns as land. Heading to combat, he sends Ragavan at Claw King, who has no blockers, with Hidden gaining a treasure and Claw King exiling a DRC off the top. Hidden likes the idea of filling his graveyard and casts a creature. Fernando heads straight to combat and also sends the monkey at Claw King, who exiles a Fellwar Stone off the top. Fernando actually has nothing better to do and ends his turn casting the Fellwar Stone, passing after that. Claw King has a Misty Rainforest, fetching to grab an Underground Seat. A Chromehawks then comes out, imprinting a Monarch Betrayal. 2 mana then gets him a Dockside, gaining him 5 treasures. He spends one of the new treasures on a gamble, finding a card to hand and randomly discarding a Cyclonic Rift. And while I thought maybe that was the card he tutored for, Claw King then taps out for an Adnaz. The spell resolves and he starts revealing cards. Although while he's finding good cards, there doesn't seem to be much fast mana in the top of his library, as he delves pretty deep, ultimately stopping at 11 life, with the only rock he drew being an LED. He has to head to discards. At least he's able to sculpt a pretty nice hand if he can survive a little longer. Death untaps and gains 2 black mana off his carpet. He plays and cracks a Windswept Heath for a Tundra, using one of his black to cast a Dark Ritual into a Demonic Tutor. He's hoping since no counterspells came out for the Adnaz, he's good to go, as he casts a Thassa's Oracle. Although Hidden dashes his plans as he cracks his treasure for a Red Elemental Blast, triggering the DRC to surveil and keep his card on top. Death doesn't have a response to the Red Blast and follows it up with a Demonic Consult. This was his last card in hand as he names Monarch Betrayal. Although it's luckily not in the top 6, he finds it pretty quickly off the top, using the rest of his floating mana and his Lotus Petal, casting Betrayal. Although unfortunately he realizes pretty quickly there's no fast mana in the graveyard, and he has to pass after that.
Fun.
Nah. Even I can blunder. Even I can blunder.
Hidden is safe from his crypt and heads to combat. He sends the monkey at Death, who exiles an Imp Seal off the top. Hidden really debates whether or not to cast the tutor, as he can make a pseudo Entomb if he casts another non-creature with the DRC. But ultimately, he's worried about Claw King and decides to just hold up mana. Fernando is still lacking lands and heads to combat, sending the monkey at death, who exiles an extract off the top. Fernando uses his Fellwar Stone to cast a spell, exiling a Thrasios out of Claw King's library. Claw King heads to his turn and plays a Training Center. 2 mana then gets him a Phantasmal Image, which enters as another copy of Dockside, gaining him another 5 treasures. Next out is a Demonic Tutor, to which Fernando responds with a Spell Snare, to which Claw King responds with an offer you can't refuse. Fernando then gains 2 treasures, and Claw King goes searching through his library. He finds a card to hand and casts an Underworld Breach. The Breach is good, and Claw King responds with a Brain Freeze. He gets a total of 6 copies of the spell, but responding to that, Fernando casts an Abrupt Decay on the Breach. Needing an answer, Claw King cracks his LED for triple black, discarding his hand. He then responds with the Demonic Consult, naming Yawgmoth's Will. It's not in the top 6, but it's the 7th card, which was very lucky on his part. He knows he can't continue to go off and wants to set up for the next turn. The Abrupt Decay then takes out the Underworld Breach, with Claw King milling himself with the Brain Freeze.
I'm kind of wishing I didn't crack my knee betrayal too early.
Yeah.
Pass turn?
I didn't expect I'd get a turn, you know? I was like,
Bro, I'm sad about myself, the demonic betrayal in the Chrome box.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean,
Fernando
Fernando's really been saving us this game. Death untaps, draws, and passes after that, with hidden at his end step Enlightened Tutoring. He bins a Sacred Foundry off the DRC and finds an Altar of Dementia to put on top. Hidden draws his tutor card and heads to combat. He sends the monkey at Fernando, who has no blockers, and exiles a Phantasmal Image off the top. Hidden gains a second treasure and uses one of them to cast the clone. It enters as a copy of Dockside to gain him 4 treasures. 2 mana then gets him his tutored altar, surveilling a Flooded Strand into the grave off the DRC. 1 treasure then helps him out getting his own Dockside, which gets him another 4 treasures. This then lets Hidden cast his commander Kroxa and Kunoros. And for those that don't know the combo, with Kroxa's trigger on the stack, Hidden can sack his commander to the altar to mill himself 6 and actually reanimate Kroxa itself with its own trigger, gaining another ETB and an opportunity to sacrifice itself to mill. And while you do need to exile 5 cards each time, you net a card in the bin, and continue the chain. With the actual combo being you mill until you find both Abdul Adrian and Karmic Guide in your graveyard. The last reanimate off Kroxa will actually hit the Karmic Guide, which will bring back Abdul. Abdul then enters, exiles the Karmic Guide, and then you can sacrifice Abdul to the altar, milling cards and getting the Karmic Guide back to the field. Karmic Guide then enters, reanimates Abdul, you get a warrior out of the process as well, and you can repeat the process for infinite warriors and infinite mills for your opponents. Although, as I'm recording this, I realized that I could have just used Karmic Guide to bring back Death's Thassa and win that way. And before I get onto the game review, I do want to thank a special Patreon member, Josh Schutt, for his support of the channel, along with all of our other Patreon supporters as well. Game review. Well, dang, Fernando was the MVP that game for stopping other people and not winning himself. He had all the interaction, but never enough mana to cast Najeela and hold up interaction as well. He was able to slow down Death and Claw King, but you can only do so much against 3 opponents. As for Death, I don't know whether or not it was safe for him to go for the win with Thassa's, but with that being his only 2 cards left in hand, I don't think it was wrong to do so. Although yes, it was certainly a misplay with the Monarch Betrayal. As for Claw King, I think he should have held that Adnaz for at least Death's turn, as to not have to discard due to hand size. But it definitely could have gone different if he had peeled some more fast mana to actually go off instead of just passing. And as always, I want to thank all the players who joined for the games, and remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. I'll see you guys later.